Okay, good morning and welcome to class. We are going to get started. First, does anyone have any questions on anything? Okay. If you have questions, feel free to shout them out during the lecture or send the chat, or if you have another, shoot me an email. I'll be glad to get back to you. You know that. We are continuing our discussion on the nutrients and nutrition in the chapter on nutrition and metabolism. And we had just about gotten to the beginning of proteins. That's where I want to start. Let me get in here and find my, there we go. So everybody should see the slide on. So everybody should see the slide. It says proteins. Now, the thing about proteins is that proteins can either be complete proteins or incomplete proteins. Proteins that come from, first of all, a complete protein is one that has all 20 amino acids. An incomplete protein only has some of the amino acids, doesn't have all 20 in it. So we classify them as complete or incomplete. Proteins from animal sources are complete proteins. So beef, chicken, fish, dairy, all these are going to have all 20 amino acids. That's what we call complete proteins. Plant sources are incomplete proteins. They may have some, but not all. And every plant source will be different. Some plant proteins will have, 18 proteins, 18 amino acids. Another will have 16 amino acids or 12 amino acids. So there's plant sources will provide all 20 amino acids, but there is no one plant source of protein that will give you the 20 amino acids our bodies need. And things like beans and peas don't have everything. Corn and the cereal grains don't have all 20. Any of the nuts, tree nuts, for example, walnuts or almonds and things like that. I have to stop thinking what else comes from trees. But if you combine those proteins, if you combine the plant proteins in food, you'll get all 20 of the essential amino acids. The ideal combination for a plant eater is some sort of legumes and a cereal. Beans and rice is a great combination, or beans and corn, because the overlap of the proteins will give you all 20 amino acids that your body needs. So you have to, cereal grains like corn or rice, and any of the legumes, beans or peas or whatever combination you like, the two of those together. So if your patients are insisting on, a plant-based diet, whether they're consider themselves a vegan or a vegetarian or doesn't matter, and that's perfectly acceptable as long as they know to mix and match their foods. They have to be able to mix and match their plant proteins, their food sources, so they get all 20 of the amino acids. Our bodies need all 20. We won't make proteins in the ribosomes if we're missing an amino acid. So we have to have all 20 amino acids. We use our proteins, of course, for structure and function. The skeletal muscle, the tiny fibers that make up our skeletal muscle are all protein. Collagen, the most abundant protein in the human body, is all protein. Elastin, the elastic fibers, are all protein. Keratin, the waterproofing compound in our skin, is all protein. as well. And then those are the structural proteins. Now we've got the functional ones like the antibodies and enzymes, the globular proteins, most of the hormones are protein based. They're that squishy globular structure. So we have both structure and function. And to make sure that they work, we have to have all 20 amino acids. So how much protein do we take in on a daily basis? Well, you could try to do the math and figure out grams per kilogram or something like that. But the average is about 50 grams a day. The average adult should take in about 50 grams of protein a day. And sort of put that in some sort of framework, that's about what you would get in a quarter pounder or a Whopper or a piece of chicken or a piece of fish or a piece of beef. So the average serving size is, the average serving size on a plate is about 4 ounces. That's what most chefs and cooks will associate with the serving size. 4-ounce piece of meat or beef meat or chicken or fish, and that will give you about 50 grams of protein, or what you would get in your Whopper or your quarter pounder, depending on what you're eating. So about 50 grams of protein a day. Now, proteins are our source of amino acids. Our bodies can't make all 20 amino acids. We have to get a certain amount from our diet. There is what we call the all or none rule for protein synthesis. All amino acids have to be present for protein synthesis to take place. So that's, we have that. This is the requirement. That's why these complete proteins are necessary to us. Otherwise, we don't make protein. We don't make the, we eat protein. We start the digestion process in our stomach. We complete the digestion process of proteins in the small intestine. What we do to a protein that we eat is we break it down into its individual amino acids. So essentially, we're going to recycle the amino acids we've taken in and put them to use in our bodies to make new proteins. So we're going to take the amino acids that we've acquired from our diet, and then our cells are going to use those to make new proteins at the ribosomes. We're not going to do that if we don't have all the amino acids. Now, what about proteins and fuel? Well, we know that thanks to gluconeogenesis, we can take the lipids and break them down and convert them to glucose, and we can do the same thing with proteins. Generally, what we do is once we've exhausted all of our carbohydrate supplies, then we'll go after the lipids. Once we've burned through most of our lipids, then we'll start working on the protein. And we'll start breaking down the protein in our muscle mass, for example. We can survive, the human body can survive for about 30 days without food, only 3 days without water, but about 30 days without food. So we can, as we start breaking down the carbs, the lipids, and then the proteins. So another term here that's very important to us is nitrogen balance. Nitrogen balance is a measure of the rate of protein synthesis compared to the rate of protein breakdown, because we're always building up, making new proteins and tearing down old proteins. Keratin disappears when we lose skin cells. We make the keratin, we lose it. Our nails break off, our hair grows and gets cut. So we're making keratin and we lose the keratin. And so collagen fibers wear out and get replaced by new collagen fibers. So we're always making proteins and tearing them down. So nitrogen balance refers to that point where the rate of making new protein, the rate of protein synthesis is equally balanced by the breakdown of protein. But, so it's a zero sum. We're not making more protein than we need. We're not tearing down more protein than we should. Now, we can be in a positive balance if we're making more protein than our breakdown is. Since children grow, we find that if we feed children, they'll grow. Well, children will grow and are constantly, and in this growth, they are always making more protein than they're tearing down, because they're always in a growth state, slow or rapid until adolescence is complete. So that is positive protein. It's a positive balance. We'd see that also if a person suffers from an injury, for example, a fracture, blunt force trauma, something like that. You're going to see a lot of tissue repair going on there. So the protein synthesis rate will be higher. So children are always going to be in a positive balance, and someone who's recovering from an injury, be in a positive balance. Negative balance occurs when breakdown is greater than the buildup. People under a great deal of stress may be in a negative balance. They may be tearing proteins down faster than they're building them up. People dealing with burns or infections are maybe losing proteins at a faster rate than building up. They will be in a negative balance. Diet has a lot to say here about positive and negative balance too. Depending on what your patient is eating, you may see that if they're not eating the right, if they're not eating a balanced diet, maybe they're obsessed on eating nothing but cornflakes. And there's nothing wrong with cornflakes. I like cornflakes. I don't really like cornflakes, but some people do. Anyway, the point is, if your patient is obsessed on eating nothing but cornflakes every day, that's all they'll eat is cornflakes. Okay, are they going to be in a positive balance or a negative balance? They will likely be in a negative balance because they're not getting all their amino acids, and they're tearing down the proteins that they have at a faster rate of building back up. So diet plays a lot. Diet will play a role here too, particularly in your older patients. Older patients that are on limited incomes will often skimp on food and eat certain things. Proteins tend to be the most expensive foods available. Just the way it has worked out. I don't know why it's worked out that way, but most food, the complete proteins, the meat and dairy sources are the most expensive sources of protein. The incomplete proteins, the plants, and the vegetable proteins are less expensive, but you have to mix and match. So we find that malnutrition can frequently occur in older patients simply because they're not, if they're on a fixed income or a limited income, they may not be able to acquire all the protein they need. So this becomes a health issue in some of your older patients, some of your younger patients too, because again, if you can't afford to purchase protein in whatever form, then you may not be getting it. So what controls protein use and protein synthesis, of course? Well, the sex hormones drive protein synthesis, particularly during puberty. When we hit puberty, we have rapid body growth as we reach our adult stature, and we're, these anabolic hormones, anabolic reactions are build-up reactions that require energy. And so we have growth hormone and thyroid hormone at work, and we are busy making proteins as we grow to our adult stature. triggered by the sex hormones, driven by the sex hormones. So we see protein buildup going on in here. If our growth hormone levels drop, or the sex hormone levels drop, which they can taper off as we age, we may see a drop in protein synthesis later in life. Now this is this is the example I was talking about, how you mix and match food sources. Probably should have had this slide up one earlier. Here we're looking at corn. Corn provides, look at our total protein needs, what does corn provide? Corn provides tryptophan and methionine. Corn provides tryptophan and methionine right here. Beans, let me back up. Corn provides tryptophan, methionine, valine, threonine, phenylalanine, and leucine. Beans give us valine, threonine, phenylalanine, leucine, isoleucine, and lysine. Now those are the ones that, those two plants right there, there's the overlap. We have 4 amino acids that they overlap on, but those are, so between it, but the ones that corn are only providing are tryptophan and methionine, and beans are giving us isoleucine and lysine. So each set, and there's more involved here too, but each set of plants will give us part of the complete list. But when we put two different combinations together, we'll get everything we need. Beans and corn, grains and legumes. Corn and beans, corn and peas, rice and beans, rice and peas. Whatever legume you're looking at, a pea plant or a bean plant. So a grain plant and a bean plant, rice and beans, very popular combination to give you everything you need. Corn and beans, corn and peas, whatever. This will give you, because of the overlap, the green area here is the overlap. Because of the overlap, we get all the amino acids we're going to need if we mix and match our plant sources. Okay, so moving on, we're down, those are the major nutrients, carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Now the minor nutrients, we have the vitamins and minerals. Vitamins function as coenzymes. Vitamins function as coenzymes. Coenzymes help an enzyme to do its job. They're not little enzymes or assistant enzymes or wannabe enzymes. They just help the enzyme do its job. We take most vitamins we take in our diet, or in a multivitamin like you see here. Some we make. We make vitamin D in our skin. Exposure to ultraviolet radiation stimulates the production of vitamin D in our skin. Vitamin D is essential for bone building. Vitamin D allows us to absorb calcium in our gut. And calcium is necessary to build bones. We make vitamins in our gut, also in our colon. When I say our gut, I'm talking, vitamin D helps us to absorb calcium in our small intestine. That's probably a more precise way of saying it. And in our gut, our colon, we see some forms of vitamin B and vitamin K manufactured by the bacteria that live in our colon. Now that bacteria is breaking down the waste products that, the material in our colon are the waste products we're eventually going to get rid of as species. And the bacteria that live there, our indigenous, normal, healthy bacteria, are breaking are attacking those waste products, as indigestible waste products, and forming some types of vitamin B and vitamin K in there. The vitamin K, absolutely essential to the clotting process. Vitamin B, all sorts of uses for us. Among others, the production of red blood cells. We also get vitamin A. We can get all of these vitamins, artificially in a multivitamin, like you see in the picture here. But we also, like I said, we make these vitamins. Beta-Carotene we make from foods that are high in, let me back up. Beta-Carotene is a pigment that makes certain foods orange, like orange juice and carrots. Beta-Carotene is essential to make vitamin A. You may have heard the statement that eat your carrots, it's good for your eyesight. Well, there is a certain amount of truth in that statement, only a certain amount, but there's a certain amount of truth in there. And the follow-up, of course, which is the old wives' tale. You've never seen rabbits have great eyesight because they eat carrots all the time. Well, that's not completely true either. But the truth in that statement is that the pigment, beta-carotene, in the carrot or in the orange juice or in the orange is going to be converted to vitamin A in our bodies. And vitamin A is absolutely essential for maintaining the photoreceptors in our eye, particularly our night vision. Particularly for our ability to see in dim light. So vitamin A, absolutely essential to that. And so we eat foods that contain beta-carotene. We eat carrots, we drink orange juice, we eat oranges, or we take multivitamins in addition to all that. Now, the thing about beta-carotene is that there's a limit to what you can get, to any benefit you get from that. Yes, carrots contain beta-carotene and they're good for your eyesight, but if some is good, more is not better. If some is good, more doesn't help. And there's a limit to how much you can eat and get any benefit from it. After that, you're just eating carrots because you like carrots, or drinking orange juice because you like orange juice. There is a point where you can't improve the production of vitamin A in your body. We see that we can't always get every vitamin we need from any one particular food group. We get vitamin D from milk. Did you know that vitamin D is added to milk? Vitamin D, naturally occurring milk, naturally produced milk from a cow, right out of a cow. I guess we call it organic milk. Does not contain vitamin D. Vitamin D is added to milk, whole milk. 100 years ago, when you got milk, it usually wasn't homogenized, and it didn't have vitamin D in it. It's only probably been in the past 70 years that maybe 50 years, 60 years that it became very common to have vitamin D in whole milk, and to have milk homogenized, because it even into the 1970s, 1960s, when milk delivery was still common in the US, that milk would often, if it wasn't homogenized, the cream would separate out from the rest of the milk, and you'd have to shake it up to get the cream mixed in there. Homogenized milk probably didn't show, I don't know, probably not until the 1950s and 60s. So I digress now, but milk, so now milk now is a good source of vitamin D in addition to what we're getting from sunlight. But we don't get vitamins from any one, there is no one source of food that gives us every vitamin. So lots of people take multivitamins on a daily basis. That's a good thing. Taking too much of it is a bad thing. There are limits to what a vitamin can do for us. Vitamins come in two forms. Vitamins are either water soluble or fat soluble. The water soluble vitamins are the B complex vitamins and vitamin C, the stuff that we find in fruit juice, orange juice, lemon juice, grapefruit juice, these things like that. They are water soluble. The B12, vitamin B12, is water soluble, but it needs a special protein in the stomach to be absorbed. The water soluble vitamins don't get absorbed. And get stored. That's they get absorbed, but they don't get stored. We use what we need. So you take your vitamin, it's absorbed in the small intestine, and we use exactly what we need, and then whatever's left over is excreted. It goes down the drain, literally down the drain. A mega dose of a water soluble vitamin is a waste of the vitamin and a waste of your patient's resources, because large doses, mega doses of water soluble vitamins do no good. Our bodies only use what they want or what they need. They don't need the mega doses. In the 1960s, there was a big push for mega doses of vitamin C, because it was claimed that would ward off the cold virus. Well, it turns out there's many viruses that cause colds, but it was thought that a mega dose of vitamin C would boost your immune system, and you wouldn't would be less likely to develop a cold, and you could take mega doses of vitamin C and you would get over the cold quicker. Well, your body only uses what it needs, and so a mega dose of vitamin C, large doses of vitamin C, they're not going to hurt you. They're not going to hurt your patient, but they're not going to help, because there's a limit to what the body can use. We get rid of extra vitamins that are water soluble within an hour. So if your patient's taking a mega dose of vitamin C every morning, they're going to get rid of that within an hour. The body is only going to use what it needs and not store it. Now, the other side of this are the fat solubles. The fat solubles can go through cell membranes. Water soluble vitamins have to have some sort of specialized carrier to get into the cell, because water doesn't go into the cell easily. It has to have an aquaporin to get through. Fat soluble vitamins can slide right across the membrane. Vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K are the fat solubles. A, of course, is from Beta-Carotene. It improves the efficiency. It's necessary for the rods and cones, the photoreceptors in our retina. Vitamin D allows us to absorb calcium in our small intestine. Vitamin E regulates our ability to clot or not clot. Vitamin E tends to keep our blood cells from sticking together, because we don't want our blood to stick together unless we're going to plug a hole in our skin. Vitamin K functions as a coagulant. Vitamin K is our coagulant. So vitamin E is sort of functioning like an anticoagulant, you know, like a blood thinner, and a vitamin K functions like vitamin K will control, allows our blood to clot when it needs to. So vitamin E works as an anticoagulant, blood thinner. Vitamin K is just the opposite, allowing us to clot when we need to. And it's a nice balance between vitamin E and vitamin K. You know, they sort of work against each other, and that's fine. That's what they're supposed to do. Fat-soluble vitamins can be absorbed and stored. Water-soluble are absorbed, used, and excreted. Fat-solubles are absorbed and stored up. Vitamin K keeps getting made in the gut all the time. The problem with excessive consumption of vitamin E, for example, means that your blood may be more prone to anticoagulation. Your patient may, mega doses of vitamin E effectively acts like a blood thinner, and that's not a good thing, because your patient may be more prone to bleeding if they're taking, if they're injured, if they're taking mega doses of vitamin E. Yes, it's in fish oil. Yes, it's good for us. It has lots of good uses, but large doses of it are not. And this is definitely a case of if some is good, more is not better. You know, the water solubles, if some is good, more is useless. The fat solubles, if some is good, more is dangerous. We don't want mega doses of vitamin E in our bodies. We don't want mega doses of vitamin D. What do we do there? We may be absorbing too much calcium in our small intestine. You know what excessive amounts of calcium do? They form kidney stones, which, if you've ever had one, if you've ever known anybody that had one, they're very painful. Now, I'm not saying that vitamin D causes kidney stones, but excessive doses of vitamin D, mega doses of vitamin D, are not going to make super strong bones. The bones can only use so much calcium. Excess calcium will get trapped in the kidneys and may form kidney stones. So it's just something to think, it's a concern here. Our bodies like to stay, I haven't said it for a while. Our bodies like to stay in homeostasis. They like to stay within their established levels. Excessive amounts of anything, good or bad, excessive amounts of any product may, at best, have no additional benefit. At worst, may have some significant consequences. And so we have to be careful. You have to counsel your patients. Don't take mega doses of vitamins. They don't help. They may hurt. Okay. So what benefit do we get from vitamins? Well, we use these as coenzymes, of course, to help the protein enzyme do its job. We also see these vitamins functioning as antioxidants to destroy free radicals. Again, a free radical is an ion that maybe have the wrong charge on it. It may be a sodium ion that, instead of being a cation, somehow has become an anion, a sodium with a negative charge, a hydrogen with a negative charge, or an OH group from water with a positive charge. Any of these combinations are possible. These molecules, these free radicals, are, because of their nature, as they pass through cells, as they're formed and pass through cells, they destroy normal operations. They destroy organelles. They destroy tissues, or they damage tissues. Antioxidants, if they accumulate, may be a contributor to various types of cancer. So we have one of the things that we see with our vitamins, particularly vitamin C, E, and A, and vitamin C in particular, are going to be the big antioxidants that, they function sort of like peroxisomes do. They destroy these free radicals. Broccoli. If you like broccoli, or if you like cauliflower, if you like Brussels sprouts, that's definitely an acquired taste, Brussels sprouts. They all contain vitamin A and vitamin C, which function as the antioxidants here. So, and that's a good thing for us. We like that. We like to destroy these free radicals. We don't want the free radicals to accumulate. Diets that are low in vitamins, diets that are low, particularly in vitamin C here, diets that avoid the leafy greens, and the broccoli, the cauliflower, the spinach, the kale, and Brussels sprouts are all good. They're all good sources of vitamin C and vitamin A. They're not necessarily popular foods for some people. Some people like spinach and broccoli and Brussels sprouts, and many people don't. So the leafy greens are a good source here. Even something as simple as various types of lettuce. The dark green lettuces, romaine, for example, is a good source of vitamin C, necessary to help form these antioxidants. Again, the megadoses are useless. Megadoses are useless, and they're either going to add no benefit or they can create a health risk. The last of the minor nutrients are minerals, and minerals are another term we use here for the elements that are involved in the body. Calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chloride, and magnesium are the 7 minerals that our bodies use the most of. The big 4 would be the calcium and potassium and sodium. And it's a toss-up between phosphorus and sulfur here, because phosphorus is what we need to embed in our bones to help make them hard. It's mostly calcium. Sulfur forms a lot of bonds between the amino acids and the proteins. So it's a sort of a toss-up on those two. I would say the big 3 are calcium, potassium, and sodium. Chloride is there, but it doesn't really do a whole lot for us. But because we'll see when we get into AMP2 that we depend on calcium and potassium and sodium particularly for muscle contractions and for nerve impulses. So the other minerals we need, like iron is considered a mineral. We need iron in our hemoglobin. We need these minerals for things to work right in our bodies for certain. It may help in enzymes. It may help in other molecules. Magnesium shows up. Sulfur shows up. Trying to think of any other ones that would be there in large amounts. We don't want to take too much. We don't want to overdose on any of these minerals, because unpleasant consequences can occur. If the idea is that calcium is good for us, which it is, calcium in our diet is good because it builds up our bones. We need calcium in our bones. We also need calcium for blood clotting. We also need calcium for muscle contractions and nerve impulses. Very, very important in muscle contractions and in nerve impulses. Our heart depends on calcium so it can beat. So that's a very important thing there. So calcium is good. The biggest reservoir of calcium in our bodies is in our bones. But you can overdo it. You can overdo the uptake of calcium. excessive amounts of calcium can lead to kidney stones, among other things. There are conditions known as hypercalcemia, where you have excessive amounts of calcium, which can lead to all sorts of problems with the nervous system. It's not, again, if some is good, more is not better. I used to work with a woman years ago, as they say, in a previous life, who had this obsessive compulsion for fruit-flavored Tums tablets. And if you know anything about Tums, they're an antacid. They are made mostly calcium carbonate, essentially chalk. That's what calcium carbonate is. That's what most the basic reflux medications that don't have any extra medicines, or like Prevacid or something like that. The basic medication, Tums, always started out as just a tablet of calcium carbonate, which would neutralize the stomach acid. Well, fruit-flavored Tums are just chew them up and they taste like oranges or grapes or whatever. And I shared an office with this woman who would go through a jumbo bottle of Tums every day. And because she loved the flavor of them, and she had some sort of mineral deficiency in her body. And so she would just chew these up on a constant basis. And, she always had problems with kidney stones, and she could never figure out why. And nobody could explain it to her. Anyway, it's a long story. So other minerals, iron needed in hemoglobin, iodine. We need iodine in our diet to be able to make thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone, which we need to control our metabolic rate, isn't made unless iodine is present. And of course, sodium and fluoride are what we call electrolytes. They are electrolytes in our plasma and inside our cells. So those are the minerals. So, okay, so we've taken a look at the major nutrients, the carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins. We know that we can, it all revolves around glucose. That, as far as energy goes, we know that we can take the carbs and break them down to glucose. We can take a polysaccharide like starch and break it down to glucose, and then we can burn glucose, we oxidize it, and we can rip apart the covalent bonds holding the glucose molecule together and release the potential energy and use it. We can convert lipids to glucose, and we can convert proteins to glucose. Lipids and proteins also have their own unique properties that we have to have. We've talked about those. We talked about the minerals and the vitamins. Now we're going to talk about how we obtain this stored energy in the covalent bonds. We say we oxidize glucose, and we break the covalent bonds and we release the potential energy. Where does it go? Well, it goes to ATP. We've said that a couple times. Where does it go? How much do we make? What do we do with it? The term that covers all of these actions of taking glucose and ripping it apart and releasing energy and building up ATP, all these chemical reactions are called metabolic reactions, or our metabolism. Metabolic activities come in two forms. We either are building things up, through anabolic reactions. We're making large molecules from small ones. We take little molecules and build them up into big molecules, like when we make glycogen in our liver. When we have excessive glucose present that our cells can't use, we store it, the excess glucose, in the form of glycogen. That's an anabolic reaction. Sometimes we store it in the form of fat. That's also an anabolic reaction. We build things up. We store energy in these anabolic reactions. It takes energy to it takes energy to build up large molecules, and we're using that energy and storing it in the molecule. How are we storing it in a molecule? In the covalent bonds. Whenever we say we're storing energy in glycogen, or storing energy in fats, it refers to the covalent bonds that hold the molecule together and the potential energy of those covalent bonds. Because those electrons out in the valence shells don't have to work near as hard as the electrons do near the nucleus. So the electrons near the nucleus of an atom have to work very hard to avoid being sucked into the nucleus. They're not going to get sucked in, but there's a very powerful pull from the nucleus. The electrons in the valence shell have a pull on them too, but it's not as powerful. They're further away. So they don't have to work as hard. So they have a great deal of potential energy that can be used. And when we rip apart a covalent bond, we can take that covalent energy, that energy from the valence shell, the covalent energy, if you will, and use it for something. We can put it into an ATP molecule and power our muscle, or we can pump sodiums out of the cell, or we can send a nerve impulse. Now, a catabolic reaction is breaking large molecules down to small ones. That's what we get when we break down glucose, break down glycogen to get the glucose. An anabolic reaction takes energy, and we spark it, and we build up long chains of molecules to get glycogen. We take little glucoses, that are going into the cell, and we build up long chains of them, and we have glycogen. We've stored our energy in the glycogen. It's taken energy to form those, to push those molecules of glucose together, and now we're parking, that energy is parked in those long molecules because we've got valence electrons. We have a whole bunch of covalent bonds formed between each glucose molecule. That's the stored energy. When we break that glycogen down and then we break down the glucose, when we rip apart those covalent bonds holding the glucose molecule together and end up with carbon dioxide and water, we've released a lot of energy. So catabolic reactions make little molecules from big ones and release energy. Anabolic reactions make big molecules from little ones and require energy. Anabolic reactions, those large molecules, are stored energy, if you will. Okay. Anabolic reactions. We make our polysaccharides this way, the glycogens that we store energy in. Our triglycerides are made by anabolic reactions. Our proteins are made by anabolic reactions. We take little molecules and make big ones. Proteins come from amino acids linked together. Triglycerides are formed when we fasten fatty acids. When we create fatty acid chains, all those carbons and hydrogens linked together, and then we put them together with glycerol. And polysaccharides are nothing but a bunch of glucoses linked together, like you see here. Here we have, or even sucrose to make a disaccharide. Here we have a monosaccharide and a monosaccharide giving us a disaccharide. That is an anabolic reaction. There is more energy stored here than there is here. So we get more energy, as we're storing more energy now in the larger molecule. The larger the molecule is, the more energy that is stored in it. Catabolic reactions break big molecules into little ones. We call it a decomposition reaction, a catabolic reaction. We split the molecule into smaller components. We break the disaccharide into individual monosaccharides. So, we break glycogen into glucose. We break starch into glucose so that we take the large molecule and break it apart. And that releases energy. When you have a catabolic reaction, you release energy. You're digesting food and breaking it down to glucose so that we can then release the energy from the glucose is a catabolic reaction. Taking the glucose that's in our blood and that goes into our cells, when there's excess glucose, we can store that glucose as glycogen and use it later. So, term here in metabolic activities, cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration is not breathing. It says respiration, and it says cellular, but it's not, the cells aren't breathing. This is a term for a chemical process that's going to take place inside our cells. It summarizes the breakdown of food as a fuel, like glucose. It's the catabolism of glucose. How about a catabolic breakdown of glucose? And then capturing the energy coming off of this to make ATP. So cellular respiration is the process where we break down food, capture the energy in it, and use it to make ATP. The energy is measured in calories. Let's go back to your Snickers bar. 180 calories. I guess, I don't know how much. I think it's 180 calories. 180 calories in your Snickers bar, or 60 calories in your apple. That is a measure of the available energy in the apple, 60 calories. We can break we can break the food, the apple, down and release, what's in the apple? It's starch. It's a polysaccharide. We can break the polysaccharide down, ultimately the glucose, and then we can break the glucose down. We can break the covalent bonds holding the glucose together and release that energy and then use it to make ATP. That's what a catabolic reaction does. So when we eat an apple or eat a Snickers bar, the calories in there represent the total sum of potential energy available to us. The Snickers bar has 180 calories of potential energy. An apple has 60 calories of potential energy. And so when we break the bonds, we can release that potential energy and then go make ATP with it. So the first term to know is cellular respiration. The second term to know is phosphorylation. Enzymes shift high energy phosphate groups of ATP to other molecules. Phosphorylation. In other words, when we make an ATP molecule, and we can use that ATP to power activities in our cells, the sodium potassium pump. Now, how do we get that energy from the ATP? Well, the high energy bond is at the third phosphate. ATP consists of 3 phosphates on its end. And the third phosphate is the high energy phosphate. And so by transferring that phosphate to another molecule, like for example, the protein molecule of the sodium potassium pump, because that's all it is, it's a protein molecule. It's organized as a carrier protein. That's its unique shape, embedded in the cell membrane. It's a molecule. We transfer the third phosphate to the carrier protein, and when that third phosphate comes over, it brings its energy with it, and that powers the pump, the carrier protein, the sodium potassium pump, to pump sodiums out of a cell. That is phosphorylation. All it means is we're transferring the third phosphate from the ATP to a molecule to get something done. So once it's phosphorylated, it can do things. It's like charging your cell phone. You can't, if your phone isn't charged, it's not going to work. When you charge the phone, it'll work as long as you have energy available. And so you take energy from the wall, from the outlet, through your charger into your phone, and the phone works. And so you're transferring, you're taking energy from the wall, storing it in your battery in the phone, and then transferring that energy to the phone to activate the phone. Doing the same thing with phosphorylation. We're charging we're creating we're creating an ATP molecule with energy attached to it. We transfer that phosphate group to another molecule. The molecule works, and we have to keep doing it again and again. Nothing happens to the phosphate, nothing happens to the ADP, except now it's looking for energy to reload and reattach itself. So phosphorylation is shifting the high energy phosphate to a molecule. That's how we get the energy to do stuff. We transfer it to a muscle cell so that we can have a muscle contraction. We transfer it to a nerve cell so we can generate a nerve impulse. We transfer it to the sodium potassium pump so we can pump sodiums out of a cell. Everything involves the movement of that third phosphate. This is phosphorylation. So cellular respiration and phosphorylation. Two words, two terms you need to remember. Now, what about enzymes? This slide says enzymes, so it must be important. I even made it in colorful letters here so you'd see it. Enzymes. Enzymes are how we control the metabolic reactions in our bodies. We don't want to release all of the energy together at once. All the energy stored in a glucose molecule is a pretty large amount. If we were to release all of the energy in all of the glucose molecules in our body at one time, theoretically, we could explode. So theoretically, I don't think it's ever happened because we don't do it that way. But it would, it's theoretically possible because the amount of energy stored in every glucose molecule is a pretty powerful amount. So we don't let that happen. We use our enzymes to control how rapidly we break down glucose. We know what enzymes do. You don't need as much energy to start a reaction. What does an enzyme do? It floods the area where you want a reaction to occur. And so all it does is bring the reactants together, the substrates, it brings them together in the enzyme, and a reaction occurs, and then the enzyme kicks out the new product and goes and does it again. So you can't control particle size or temperature or concentration, but you can make lots and lots of enzymes to make reactions go really fast. That's how they lower the activation energy. It's nothing special about it. It's nothing magical about it. They simply provide a way for the reactants to come together faster. Enzymes are globular proteins. They have very unique shapes because they are, as we like to say, substrate specific, which is a technical way of saying that only certain reactants fit in certain enzymes. Enzyme A may have enzyme A has a unique shape for substrates, a unique substrate. So enzyme A is only for one type of substrate. Enzyme B is only for another type of substrate. Enzyme C for even a third type. they are substrate specific. You know, the enzyme amylase in our mouth that breaks down polysaccharides only works on polysaccharides. Only the glucose molecules that make up starch will fit in the active sites of the enzyme. Nothing else will fit there. Proteins don't fit there. Lipids don't fit there. Only polysaccharides fit on amylase. It is an enzyme that is substrate specific. What is the substrate? The substrate are the reacting components. In the case of amylase, we know it's an enzyme because it ends in ASE. In the case of amylase, the only thing that fits on its active site are glucose molecules attached to, together to form starch. The glucose molecules are the substrate. Where they land is the active site. And the only things that fit there are glucose. And every enzyme is going to be different. Every enzyme is very specific. They are substrate specific. The shape of the active site determines what substrate is going to fit there. The shape of the active site is the lock. And the substrate is the key. So the substrate fits on the active site, and they're all going to be different. Amylase only works on glucose, and only when it's attached to in a long chain as starch, and only in our mouth. It's the only place amylase works. How the enzyme functions is simply bringing reactants together so a reaction can occur. That's all they do. So we bring reactants together. The reactants are the substrates. They come together on the active sites. Only those reactants that fit on the active sites land there. You may have a million different reactants in an area, and they're hitting the active site and bouncing off and hitting and bouncing off. Only the ones that fit there will land on the active site and stay there. Once they're together, they'll have their chemical reaction, and then the enzyme releases the new product. The enzyme isn't changed. It's ready to go do it again. This is how we control chemical reactions. We allow chemical reactions to occur or not occur by the presence or absence of these enzymes. Because we got to control metabolic reactions very tightly. We can't release energy too rapidly because we can't use it that fast. 60% of the energy released from a molecule of glucose goes off as heat anyway. We don't get to use 60% of the energy in a glucose molecule. We only get to use about 40% of it. If we released it faster, we wouldn't be able to get anything done. So we have to control the rate of energy release. And that's what the enzymes do. Because the chemical reactions that take place in cellular respiration are limited by the presence or absence of the enzymes. So in metabolic activity, we eat something. You eat a Twinkie. I always liked Woody Harrelson's role in Zombieland when he's looking for Twinkies. So you eat a Twinkie, and it's got energy stored in there, regardless of its regardless of its nutritional value. There are calories stored inside a Twinkie. So you eat a Twinkie. We have to process that Twinkie. We have to digest that Twinkie. We have to absorb the nutrients in the Twinkie. And we have to transport those nutrients to the cells. That is the carbohydrates and the fats, and maybe a protein or two, unlikely, but maybe a protein. We digest the carbohydrates and fats in the Twinkie. We start the process of digestion of the carbohydrates in our mouth. We continue in our stomach. We digest the fats in our small intestine. We absorb the carbs and the fats and any proteins that might be, any amino acids that might be there in our small intestine. And then it goes ultimately into our plasma for transport to the cells. That's step one. We've eaten it. We've eaten the Twinkie. And now we have the carbs and the fats and maybe the amino acids that may have been there in the Twinkie. I don't know if there are proteins or not in the Twinkie, but anyway, we've got the major nutrients out of the Twinkie. It's in our blood supply now. Now we get to the cells. Glucose enters into the cell. As our blood sugar goes up, we release insulin to open up carrier proteins in the cell membrane to let glucose come into the cell. The fats that were in the Twinkie can just slide across the cell membrane into the cell. So once we get inside the cell, now the cell has to process the material. The fatty acids are broken down or reassembled into triglycerides, because remember, the triglycerides are broken apart, absorbed through the small intestine, come back they ultimately are reassembled in the cells, and we have the fats again. Proteins form in the cells. We have protein synthesis. All those amino acids that we've just taken in from a protein are going to be reassembled into new proteins in our bodies. So we take the broken apart triglycerides and we reassemble them in the cell as triglycerides. We take the amino acids and reassemble them into proteins that we want. We take excess glucose and we make glycogen. It takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. And we break down glucose through a process of glycolysis inside the cytoplasm. So we don't ignore the fats, we don't ignore the proteins. We're busy making new proteins. That's what protein synthesis is all about. We reassemble the fats. We do need a certain amount of fats in our diet. Excess glucose is formed into glycogen, okay? But we also take our first shot at getting some energy. So we've gotten to the point where we've eaten the Twinkie, and the carbohydrates and the fats and the proteins have now come into our cells as glucose and fatty acids and glycerol and monoglycerides and stuff like that. And we have the amino acids. So all that good stuff's in our cells. So we take the glucose, we make glycogen. We take the fatty acids and the monoglycerides and we make triglycerides again. We take the amino acids and we make proteins. We also take some of the glucose now and we can oxidize it. We can burn it. We can break it apart and release energy. And this term for that is glycolysis, the lysis, the rupturing of a glucose molecule to release energy. That's the first step of getting energy out of the glucose. But it's not this step here in the cytoplasm doesn't give us a lot of energy. It gives us some, but not a lot. We have to move into the mitochondria, the organelle, the energy conversion factory, if you will. of the cell, we go into the mitochondria, and that's where we actually use oxygen to break down glucose. You know, it is an oxidative breakdown. It's the true oxidation of glucose to tear it apart. We use oxygen to tear apart the glucose molecule to release all that energy stored inside there. And the end result of step 3 is the production of carbon dioxide, the production of water, and the formation of a lot of ATP so that we can go do things. So for those of us that are visual and visual always helps me, I know. We have these are the 3 stages here. Stage 1, digestion. We eat proteins, we convert them we break them down into amino acids. We go into the cells and we reassemble the amino acids through protein synthesis into a new protein that we want. So we have beans and rice, or we have a piece of chicken and a glass of milk, or whatever. We take our proteins and we break them down to amino acids through a catabolic reaction, and then we anabolically rebuild new proteins using protein synthesis. Carbohydrates are broken down to glucose, and some of that glucose is converted to glycogen right here. Fats, the fats are broken down to glycerol and the fatty acids, and then reassembled back as triglycerides inside the cell. Stage 3 takes place in the mitochondria. Down here, it involves the use of oxygen. That's what we call an oxidative breakdown. It's a big catabolic process. We start breaking down the glucose using oxygen, and we release a tremendous amount of energy. And the end result is going to be ATP and carbon dioxide and water. So what is it about energy that we're so interested in here? Well, we know what energy is. It's the ability to do something, to do work. Heat energy, light energy, electrical energy, sound energy, mechanical energy, chemical energy, all of these are involved in our bodies. We generate heat. We need light energy so that our photoreceptors in our eyes can see things. Sound energy, the sound waves vibrate our inner ear, and those vibrations are converted into audible sounds interpreted by our brain. We are electrical, we're charged, our cells have charges on them. Muscle cells are minus 90 millivolts as their what we call our resting potential. Nerve cells have a potential of minus 70. Mechanical energy, we move things all the time. Chemical energy, we're storing energy in the form of glycogen, or we're using the energy from glucose to do things. So every one of these types of energy are found in our bodies or used by our bodies. We are constantly transforming energy from one form to another. Light energy is converted to electrical energy. Sound energy is converted to mechanical energy and then into chemical energy. All of these metabolic reactions in our bodies are involved in converting energy from one form to another, from a stored form to an active form, from a chemical version to heat or electrical. So, or from chemical to mechanical. All of these are, we're always converting energy from one form to another. We don't ever destroy energy. We don't ever make energy. We simply release it from one form to another. The term oxidation of glucose is how we release chemical energy. We oxidize glucose and we release chemical energy. That's how we get things done. The process is cellular respiration. And the end result of cellular respiration is the production of ATP. So cellular respiration. 3 steps to cellular respiration: glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, otherwise known as the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. The end result of cellular respiration is always going to be, carbon dioxide, water, ATP, that's the chemical energy, and heat. 60% of the energy that we obtain from our nutrients goes off of our bodies as heat. It maintains our constant body temperature of 98.6 or 37 degrees Celsius, maintains that constant temperature, and we maintain that temperature, but we can't do it. Once the heat goes away from our bodies, it's no longer usable. It's not destroyed, it just is transferred to a non-usable form. We radiate heat out into the space around us. We can't do anything with it then. So it's very hard to capture heat coming off of bodies. Now think about it. If you don't think that we generate a lot of heat, if we were to take if we were in the classroom, and we would take everybody from the classroom and all go into one of the storage rooms and stand there with the door shut, in a few minutes, it would start getting a little warm in there and get uncomfortable because of all the body heat we're radiating. Almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit from every person standing there in a small space. Pretty soon we're going to be giving off a lot of heat that makes that room uncomfortable. So we do generate a lot of heat. 60% of the energy coming off of 60% of the glucose energy is going to leaving our bodies as heat energy. Some of these reactions don't require any oxygen. We call it an anaerobic reaction. They only make a little ATP. The aerobic reactions use oxygen and generate vast amounts of ATP. Now, a term here: oxidation reduction reactions. Oxidation is a gain of oxygen or a loss of hydrogen. And what does that mean? Let me keep it simple here. When something is oxidized, it loses electrons and it loses energy. If you light a match, the match burns. You're releasing electrons, you're releasing energy. Energy is coming off the match as heat and light. Okay? It's a chemical reaction that occurs between the match head and the striker on the side of the box. Those two combined cause a chemical reaction to occur, and it burns. The match starts to burn. The match is giving off heat and light. You light a candle with that match. The candle is undergoing an oxidation reaction. The candle wax is being oxidized. You're breaking covalent bonds in the paraffin, the wax of the candle, and you're releasing electrons and you're releasing energy. Now, electrons are negatively charged. They don't go anywhere without their protons. The universe requires those electrons that are coming off of a candle or a match or off of a Snickers bar to be balanced by their protons, hydrogen ions. So every time you lose an electron, you lose a hydrogen ion too. So when something is oxidized, when you're burning a match, when you're burning a candle, you're giving up electrons. Well, you're not, but the candle is. You're giving up electrons and you're releasing energy. In the candle's case, it's a form of heat and light. When something rusts, like, if you leave a tool outside, a metal tool outside, and then you discover it, 3 months later, and it's all rusty. Rust formation is oxidation of the metal. And the metal is now weaker because while you're giving up electrons slowly over the course of 3 months, you're still giving up electrons. And because, it's an oxidation reaction. When you have oxidation, you give up electrons. And when you give up electrons, you give up energy. And so the metal object gets weaker over time. So if you leave a shovel out over the winter and it rusts badly, and you go to take that first dig with it in the spring and it snaps in half because the metal has gotten so weak because you've lost all these electrons. You can't look at it and say, oh, look, there goes an electron. But over time, you lose enough electrons from it to make it weak. Now, where do those electrons go? Well, something has to grab them. Something has to grab those electrons, and it's usually oxygen. When something is reduced, it's called reduced because it has become more negative. I know it doesn't make sense. Reduction means gaining those electrons. In chemist talk, reduction means that you're reducing the number of positive charges. So just take my word for it. When there's electrons that are coming off that candle, the electrons that are coming off the match, the electrons coming off the shovel have to go somewhere, and they are grabbed by oxygen. The oxygen molecule will grab those electrons and grab those hydrogens and grab that energy. So that's what an oxidation reduction reaction is. Now, I want to stop us there, and we will pick up again next Thursday. Remember, no class on Tuesday. Monday and Tuesday are fall break. The building will be open, but there are no classes. The buildings will be open for anybody that wants to go on campus and look at bones, for example, in 217 if you're in Sevierville. But there are no classes. So we will pick up again with this next Thursday. So I want to get us out of here, and I hope you enjoy your weekend.